My name is Michel van Bellinghen, as BEREC Chair 2021, and it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this webinar on BEREC public debrief following our last plenary meeting, which was held last week. And as you know, this public debriefing will be virtual again, and however, we'll see little by little around us that we will get back to normal. The worst days are behind us, and so I hope that we will soon can meet in person after this summer to have our face-to-face meetings again. Before coming to the agenda of this meeting, I would just like to come back to a few virtual events for the last few weeks, to start with the BEREC Stakeholder Forum we held in April, but also the IIC BEREC Telecommunications and Media Forum we had in May. And this was an interesting conference over several days between regulators and the industry, and we touched upon various topics such as digital platform regulation, DMA, DSA, but also other topics related to sustainability, critical infrastructure, and Europe's digital capabilities. So very interesting panels. And to close that event, I had the honor to have a fireside session with Mrs. Jessica Rosenworcel, the acting chairwoman of the Federal Communication Commission. And for those who want to look at the video, you can just go to the BEREC website. This session has been recorded. In the backdrop of our opinion about DMA, we also organized two workshops, and the first one regarding the market entry with the ITRI rapporteur, Mr. Carlos Zorinho, as speaker, and as well Mr. Pravat Agarwal from the European Commission DG Connect, and the second one focusing on consumer protection with ITRI rapporteur Andreas Schwab, and also Mrs. Inge Berners representing the European Commission DG Comp. We had also a technical workshop on IPv6 deployment across Europe in May, focusing on sharing experiences and best practices on the actions taken to facilitate IPv6 deployment at the national level. And 2 weeks ago, there was a very interesting and stimulating workshop on 5G, focusing on two themes, which are new business models and value chain, and also innovation. So this work program was organized in the backdrop of BEREC's previous work, and I refer to the BEREC 5G radar we launched at the end of last year. So there will be more workshop and events again after this summer. To keep an eye on the BEREC website and social media channels for invitations. Please don't hesitate. We want to continue the dialogue and interaction with you or stakeholders. So, coming back to our agenda for today, we can switch to the next this slide. And you will see that we will update you on opinions. These opinions were not adopted during the last plenary meeting last week. Nevertheless, was adopted in the recent months. We think it's important to give you an overview related to the legislative negotiation going on Brussels, and so basically our opinion on the NIS II review and on the roaming review as well. Then we will brief you about a study we commissioned that is assessing consumer behaviors and attitudes towards digital platforms, as adopted last week and published in the meantime. That will be followed by an overview of some additional papers and a report we issue related to Digital Markets Act, and with the aim to contribute to the discussions on this important draft regulation. This will be the end of the first part, to be followed by a Q&A session. After the Q&A session, we will of course open the room for questions from your side. We will move on a very last set of guidelines that the BEREC developed and adopted last week, stemming from the European Electronic Communications Code as well. And these guidelines are related to geographical surveys. Next point on the agenda, we will present you two reports that were adopted during the plenary meeting. Their annual report they publish every year, one on the termination rates and the other one on WACC parameters. And lastly, our co-chairs will present you all work that will go into public consultation and a questionnaire that was established to gather your inputs related to the functioning of the general authorization mechanism in the code and related to the lessons learned during the COVID-19 crisis. And again, another Q&A session. Next slide, please. Yes, during the last plenary meeting, BEREC adopted other documents which will not be presenting to you today. The first is the BEREC Annual Report 2020, so please check on the website. It has also been published in the meantime. And we have also appointed new co-chairs for sustainability. In addition to that, the heads had an exchange of view of numbers of issues such as mobile wholesale markets and the independence of NRA. We have also a presentation from the Commission, thanks to Director General Roberto Villa, about the activities of the Commission. I come to the next slide, please. Thank you. Here you find the dates on the public consultations for the documents that will be presented later on. This shows you a summary on closing date for the public consultation that has been launched a few days ago. And I'm happy to be joined by the lead authors of the document, the co-chairs of various working groups that were involved in the documents we published. So just one more thing, let me explain how you can interact and ask questions. If you want, you can just drop your question in the chat box, and I will read this out and we will try to answer you during this session. But for now, let's start with the first presentations from our co-chairs of the working group dealing with 5G and cyber security issues. Katja and Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michel. I hope we can hear ourselves well. Thank you for the floor. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We can start with the presentation. Moving for the first, thank you. So as you may know, on December 16, 2020, the Commission and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs presented a joint communication, the EU Cybersecurity Strategy for Digital Decade, which includes also a proposal for a revised directive on security of networks and information systems, the so-called NIS II proposal. The revised proposal expands the scope of the current NIS directive by adding new sectors based on their criticality for economy and society. The proposal foresees the inclusion of public administration, food, waste, space, pharmaceutical manufacturing, digital service providers, and public electronic communication networks and services under its scope. The NIS II proposal suggests that the current security provisions sitting in Articles 40 and 41 of the European Electronic Communication Code should be transferred into the NIS II directive by simply replacing them with similar provisions under Article 18 and 20 of the NIS II proposal. While BEREC recognizes that there is a rationale for the proposal to collect all critical infrastructure under one security framework, it is concerned about the effects of fragmenting the electronic communication code and about the overall effects of the proposed changes on the electronic communication markets, especially to the security level in the sector reached with targeted measures introduced already in 2009 with implementation of Articles 13A and 13B of the Framework Directive, and now included also in the code, as mentioned already in Articles 40 and 41. The BEREC 5G Cybersecurity Working Group has prepared an independent BEREC opinion on the proposal that has been published on the BEREC website. The link you can see on this slide is provided here. In the opinion, BEREC foresees some key observations and possible impacts of the proposal on the public electronic communication networks and services, and they will be presented to you in the next slide. Tim.
Okay, thank you, Katja. So BEREC shares some of its concerns in this opinion. So as Katja already mentioned, there are concerns over the EECC fragmentation when taking out some articles of the EECC. This comes with a risk of losing experience from a proven existing sector-specific regulatory framework, and therefore BEREC considers it's as most appropriate to retain Articles 40 and 41 within the EECC. There's also a risk regarding the lack of clarity of the definitions in the NIS II directive, in particular if we compare them to the EECC. Therefore, it would be useful to review and clarify these definitions, in particular the definition of security of network and information systems. BEREC also recommends to introduce sufficient safeguards to ensure the continuation of current practices and build on the knowledge and experience of the current competent authorities. And it's also recommended to assess how the NIS II directive could best complement the provisions in the EECC. So thank you. This is all from my side, and I will then pass the floor to Jana.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Katja. Good afternoon on behalf of the BEREC Roaming Working Group. We will now discuss the BEREC's opinion on the proposed roaming regulation. This document was published at the end of April, and as we understand, most of you are already familiar with it. However, we will make a short presentation to remind you the key points of the opinion, and of course, we are then available for any questions you might have on the opinion. The main message of our opinion is that we welcome the proposals of the European Commission, as this proposal extends EU roaming to a genuine roam-like at-home experience. In addition, we welcome that the Commission continues to assign to NRAs with relevant tasks, and also there is also a provision to extend the tasks that the NRAs and BEREC will deal with. Furthermore, we provide some comments regarding the provisions for quality of service, value-added services, and emergency services. And finally, we propose additional measures to be included in the regulation. In particular, we propose measures for enhanced transparency and protection from bill shocks, and measures for enhancing sustainability for MVNOs. Next slide, please. Coming now to more details, first of all, for QoS, BEREC welcomes the proposal, but is requesting for more guidance. Secondly, for value-added services, BEREC welcomes additional transparency measures, but it proposes to give more guidance on the retail transparency measures, which will be very helpful. In addition, BEREC proposes additional provisions to ensure harmonized provision for some specific value-added service ranges. And finally, BEREC notes that the database for value-added services could be established earlier. So this way, operators would find this very helpful. For emergency services, BEREC asks for more details on the frequency of receiving such information. It also proposes to have a central point of information for all emergency communications. And finally, it considers that the technical feasibility analysis of the free wholesale access to other means would be very useful. For the monitoring tasks, BEREC supports the proposed reduction of the frequency of NRAs and BEREC data collection, as this will reduce the reporting burden for both operators and NRAs. Next slide, please. Finally, the opinion includes an analysis of the proposed wholesale caps versus an analysis and a comparison versus the estimates of the action cost model. As you see from the graph, for most cases, the proposed price caps are above the estimates of the action cost model. And for these exceptions, which we see for 2022 for voice and 2025 for data, already in these cases, although there are exceptions, what we see from the cost estimates of the action cost model is that the vast majority of the estimates are below the proposed price caps. Finally, as the action cost model doesn't include 5G data, as at the time it was built, there was not enough information to include it in the model. BEREC proposes to have a review of the model in 2020, have a review of the model and have a review of the regulation in 2025, so 5G could be taken into consideration. Thank you from my side. So now I will pass the floor to Vaina to present you a very interesting study that BEREC has commissioned.
Thank you, Joanna, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vaida Ginikita, and I represent the Policy Research Center, PPMI. And I'm really pleased to present today the key findings of our recently finalized study on EU consumer perceptions and behavior on digital platforms for communication. And this topic, even if we limit ourselves to the type of platform that provides communication services mainly, is still really broad. So in the study, step by step, we explored several more specific questions. So first, what the main platforms and their services used by Europeans were. And then we moved to the key drivers for them to use or not to use the specific platform services. Then how consumers perceive and behave on these platforms and how much they're willing to pay for these services. And many of these aspects were also analyzed in the context of the complementarity or substitutions of platforms and traditional number-based services for communication. So before I move to the findings, also very briefly about the methodology and scope. So to answer those research questions I just mentioned, we relied on a mixed method approach. So first of all, an online panel survey was the quantitative element at the core of the data collection activities. And we managed to achieve a sample of almost 12,400 responses from 12 selected BEREC member states. And these target countries were selected in a multi-stage process, ensuring that the selection represents broader regions, as illustrated in this map. And then we use online panels to sample people, namely internet users from those countries, for the survey. And for that, we designed quotas by age and gender based on official statistics. And in the post-fielding stage, we also applied weights to calibrate the data to other demographic characteristics and make sure that our descriptives and inferential analysis really show something about Europeans and how they treat or use the platforms. Then also for the analysis, we also conducted a wide-scale literature review, which allowed us to contextualize and nuance the survey findings. And additional qualitative insights were also collected in interviews and 2 international online focus groups. And the key focus of all these data collection activities were 17 specific platforms that were, at the time, mostly used by European consumers, as indicated in online sources and App Store data. So these selected platforms fell into 2 broad categories: messenger applications and social networking sites. And we analyzed those two types of platforms separately, but later came to very similar conclusions for both types. So if we may move to the next slide. First of all, the study confirmed that in line with global trends, various products of, namely Facebook Incorporated, dominate the consumer choices in Europe. And this concerns both social networking sites and messenger applications. So Facebook and Instagram were the first and third mostly used social networking sites, while YouTube was in the second place across all 12 surveyed countries. Meanwhile, WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger completely dominated as the main messenger applications, although which one of them was preferred more differed slightly by country. While in Eastern and Northern Europe, we saw Facebook Messenger more popular. In Western and Southern Europe, it was WhatsApp. Then second, and speaking about the dynamics of consumer behavior on platforms, several trends were discovered. It is very clear from the data collected that most consumers multi-home, that is, that they use multiple social networking sites to access different types of information and different messenger applications also to communicate with people from different social circles of theirs. And at the same time, however, the study found that consumers have developed strong attachments and loyalty to their main messaging applications, namely those apps that they use the most. And third, looking into the main drivers or reasons for using those specific platforms that they have attachments to, speaking both about social media and messaging apps, consumers across all demographics and different apps consistently emphasized three elements. That was zero cost, ease and convenience of use, and network effects. That is, that family and friends use the same platforms. And given that Facebook and Google are companies behind the apps that are mostly used by consumers, it is important to have in mind their business model. They are, first of all, in the business of advertising, and they are very sophisticated at it. And so they can provide free services to consumers, but consumers are now, in most cases, the products and not the clients of these companies, because the consumers generate data that platforms collect and base their products on, and also provide their attention to targeted advertising, which is how these tech giants monetize. So consumer attitudes towards this, their data and privacy, was an important question of the study as well. And the survey data underscored the privacy paradox. If we could move to another slide, please. So privacy paradox on messenger applications was the discrepancy between an individual's intentions to protect their privacy and how they actually behave online. So strong majorities of respondents across various demographics and countries stated that the privacy and security of their personal data was important, but this was way less important than the benefits that digital platforms offer. And this shows that consumers were very much willing to accept these platform practices as a price for using their services. And indeed, when we looked into willingness of consumers to pay for these services with actual money, we found very clear reluctance and very strong importance of the zero cost of digital platform services. We also ran a small discrete choice experiment as part of the survey, and data showed that zero cost was a more important feature in the choice of interpersonal communication services than specific functionalities, personal data collection, and display of ads all added together. So the free use of these services seems to be extremely important. And this could be seen as one of the key reasons why messenger apps are used more and more, while traditional number-based communication services less and less. And in the survey, we found that relationships of both substitution and complementarity exist between digital platforms for communication and traditional services, such as, for example, mobile phone calls. But substitution seems to be stronger, especially if we look into younger demographics or in the overall change of consumer behavior over time and how consumers themselves associate the use of platforms with the use of traditional services. And ultimately, the trend is really clear that platforms will be increasingly important in the sector in the future, and they are already, well, getting there very, very fastly. So yeah, thank you for the attention, and I now pass the floor to Jorge and Chiara.
Thank you very much, Baida. So, good afternoon, everybody. And now to end this first session, we are to briefly present you the 3 documents we have prepared and approved in the last plenary regarding the DMA. The first one is the report on the interplay between the code and the DMA concerning number-independent interpersonal communication services that was more or less already compromised in the opinion, and the other 2 documents are trying to clarify and go deeper in some of the proposals we made in our BEREC Opinion published after the first plenary to contribute to the ongoing debate on the DMA. So if we move to the next slide and starting with the report on NIS, the report, as you have probably seen, is aimed to cover several issues. First, to provide a complete presentation on what are these services under the code. That is the definition that is being used in the DMA. So it's important to analyze what is behind the definition in the code and what is not, as well as to present the provisions applicable to NIS under the code. In the report, you can also see an analysis on the potential overlap between the code and the DMA. We are proposing a clarification on Article 1 on the DMA to address the potential overlap with the code. And additionally, as we analyze the concept of interpersonal communication services, we are raising some thoughts applicable to the DSA regarding NIS. So if we move to the next slide, here you have the main takeaways. Essentially, the NIS, of course, are covering in the code, but there are many provisions and many potential regulatory measures. Also, the DMA focus on Article 61 in the code. We are reviewing all that we can do. Sometimes still not applied because even the code has not been transposed in some countries. We also analyze the e-privacy directive because some of the obligations there for NIS establish limits to data use for confidentiality reasons that are also considering the DMA. So it's important to take it into account because this is a very special case, NIS being electronic communication services. Of course, as you know, NICs are one CPS in the DMA, and we analyze on that, and we insist on the ecosystem effect that it's key, that it's already addressed in the BEREC opinion. Still, we acknowledge that it's one of the CPS, and that even in the short future, you may have business users. So this is essentially now a communication service. And regarding the overlapping, BEREC claims for a structured consultation between the Commission, who is the competent authority, or will be in principle the competent authority for the DMA, and competent authorities for electronic communication services when imposing obligation to NICs to ensure that there is legal and regulatory certainty. And as told on the DSA, essentially we are raising an issue on NICs that mainly are limited to send to a finite number of persons. So the applications, including NICs, may also have functions for broadcasting, sending to all. In that case, and only in that case, the obligations in the DSA regarding broadcasting should be applied, but not when there is a finite number of persons, as typically is with NIS. And I pass the floor to Chiara to explain about the proposals for Article 1. So, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and good afternoon, everybody. So following up on what Jorge just presented, we are making some concrete proposals for amendments of Article 1 of the DMA, and in particular Article 1.3 of the DMA to say that the DMA should not apply to electronic communication networks in general, as defined in Article 2 of the code, nor to electronic communication services other than NIS, which are, as Jorge mentioned, one of the CPSs. And then amendments also concern Article 1.4, saying that the DMA is without prejudice to the code in general, and not only to Article 61, as it is now the case in the DMA proposals. And then additionally, we also propose to include a recital to acknowledge that there are several provisions which apply to NIS under the code, with the objective of promoting competition in the provision of electronic communication networks and services. So this is part of the NIS report as concrete proposals for amendments of the DMA to clarify the interplay between the two legislations. Then on the next slide, we are presenting then the two documents which were published last week. First of all, to give you an overview of the public consultation on the BEREC report on the ex-ante regulation of digital gatekeepers. We received 16 responses from the industry, among which gatekeepers, associations of telecom operators, competing platforms, and as well as from consumers associations, civil society organizations, and so on. And we are currently working on a report presenting the summary of how these contributions are treated and integrated in the report on digital gatekeepers. And then there will be an updated version of this report, which will be published after P3, so in October this year. And in the meantime, we have continued to actively contribute to the debate on the DMA, and we published these two concrete proposals on some key issues. On the one hand, remedy tailoring and regulatory dialogue, so the need for both. And the second paper, which is on the institutional design of the support by the national independent authorities, which is something that we have been proposing and supporting since the public consultation on the DSA package last year. So concretely, what we say in these two proposals, on the one, on the remedies tailoring and structured participation processes for stakeholders, we focus on here on making the DMA effective and future-proof. First of all, we explain the rationale and concrete ways in which the DMA could be improved to be more future-proof. And in our proposal, we say that on top of the directly applicable obligations of Article 5 and 6, so to complement these directly applicable obligations, there should be also ex-ante principles and a set of remedies which should be specified in the law, and then be tailored by the European Commission in order to address unforeseen practices, new practices, and also to appropriately tackle the challenges that gatekeepers may raise in the near future and which are not maybe not covered by the obligations in Article 5 and 6. So it would be a complementary approach of what is already there in the DMA, plus a set of ex-ante principles and remedies. And of course, this is inspired by the regulation in the ECS sector, so something which has been successfully applied and working in the last 2 decades. And secondly, also for the DMA to be effective, we say that there is a need for a structured regulatory dialogue. And this is something that we had many positive feedback during the public consultation, which is something which is really an opinion which is really shared also by, of course, by the stakeholders, but stakeholders also more generally, like including civil society and so on. And we say that the stakeholders, they should be included and involved the DMA in a structured way, so to provide for specific and concrete tools like public consultations and so on, to make sure that their feedback is integrated and heard. And also, as proposed in our documents, we also propose to add to set up a dispute resolution mechanisms, also to intervene fast in case of disputes. Then on the second paper, it's a proposal on the setup of an advisory board. And here we further developed our proposals on the tasks which are needed to make sure that the DMA is enforced in an effective and efficient way. And we say, we highlight as support that the intervention is at the EU level, but we also see that there are several reasons why an inclusion of national independent authorities under an advisory board, which could be created, would be beneficial. We see that there are constant interactions between the gatekeepers and national players and users, which are as national with a national, these national independent authorities, they also continuously monitor markets and innovation. It's something that is part of their daily activity. So there is some existing knowledge and some existing expertise which can be used, and also expertise in the ex-ante regulation enforcement, which can be beneficial in the enforcement of the DMA. And what are the tasks then that could be carried out by this advisory board? It could be data collection and the monitoring throughout the EU, raising awareness of some issues and concerns at the national level, and also ensure that the DMA is applied in a coherent way, and it's coherent also with other related regulations. And then also the monitoring of compliance with the obligations which would be defined at the EU level. And then as for the design, we propose that it's something which should be with technical expertise and independent, and it could have a light structure, not to be too burdensome. And with that's all, then from our side, so I give the floor back to Michel.
Thank you very much, Chiara. As far as I know, there is no question. So I suggest we move on to the second part. And for this, I will hand over to Begonia and Julia. You have the floor.
So thank you, Michel. Good afternoon. I'm going to present the BEREC guidelines on geographical service of network deployments for the verification of information. This is the result of the last plenary meeting. And as you know, these guidelines have been in public consultation, so I will go through the document. Can I have the next slide, please? Just a reminder of what are these guidelines. These guidelines, they provide guidance on how to verify the current reach and quality of service of broadband networks as declared by operators in the context of an Article 22 broadband survey. This includes also the verification of a declaration of an area or grid as being covered by a BHCN. The guidelines describe different verification methods and provide recommendations for authorities to follow when carrying out each of these methods. But it is also the case that authorities may choose amongst the different verification methods, and in order to make these choices, they need to take into account their need for the verification of data and the availability of information sources that may enable this verification. Finally, the guidelines require authorities to publish ex ante, this is before verification takes place, the verification methodologies, and also require authorities to outline the verification results. With this, BEREC hopes that the verification procedure is more transparent and authorities are more accountable. So can I go to the next slide, please? Do you know that these guidelines have been on public consultation by the turn of the year for more or less 1 month, or a little bit more than 1 month? BEREC has received 7 responses from different types of stakeholders, operators, also operators associations, public authorities, and other stakeholders. We are really thankful for these contributions, and we have really looked and read and thought about them. And there's been many comments, so I'm going to summarize the types of comments that we have received. Okay, there's been questions regarding the legal basis for verification. So why is BEREC writing these guidelines? Then there's been a lot, and I think almost the consensus on supporting BEREC's recommendations on transparency and accountability of the verification process, and we are very happy about this. There's an expression of concern on the proportionality of additional data requests. And finally, there is also a series of comments of different nature regarding the different verification methods and their limitations. Okay? So if we go to the next slide, I can tell you how the guidelines have been revised. Okay, BEREC considers that assuring the data, the quality of the data that operators provide in an Article 22 survey is intrinsic to the consistent implementation of the obligations under Article 22. This is the data that authorities will collect through this procedure is important and necessary for many policy and regulatory functions. So there is a need to ensure that the quality is right. Okay. On the proportionality, we sympathize that some data requests may be a big burden for operators. So we have strengthened the case for proportionality by encouraging data reuse. So the sentence is saying that if data exists, it should be reused, and also encouraging NRAs and OCAs to carefully assess any new data requests. Regarding infrastructure related data, this is about infrastructure positions and characteristics. We have clarified that in principle, access takers should not be providing this data, but this would be primarily for wholesale operators. Okay, and then in a broad summary, we have had comments on the methodologies and the limits, but we understand that the BEREC draft already included a lot of caution and expressed very clearly what were the limitations of the verification methods, and was very careful to explain that this type of information need to be treated with care. Okay, but nevertheless, those methods are still valid to analyze the coverage and quality of service declarations of operators. And finally, we are also thankful because many comments spoke about the wording and expressions and required clarification. And this is very good because we can make the guidelines a better document. And we want to thank you as well because of this. So thank you very much. I will give the floor to Julia, who will present the next document.
Thank you, Begonia. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to present you the work done by BEREC with respect to the termination rate at European level. This is an item which is not a common presence or not always in the public debriefings, but with this we would also like to flag the upcoming changes which are going to come about in the view of the application of the delegated regulations with respect to the single maximum termination rates applicable. So if we can go to the next slide, please. The termination rates reports are a result of the data collection exercise that BEREC does in close collaboration with BEREC office. And in principle, there are two reports published a year. The objectives of the reports are to track the evolution of the fixed and mobile voice termination rates in Europe, and also to detail on the cost models used to set the regulated prices for these services. The current termination rates report, which refers to data as of January 2021, comprises the data reported by 37 participants and BEREC members. So it's 27 EU countries, EEA countries, Balkan countries and participants, and also Turkey and Switzerland, all taking part in BEREC. If we can go to the next slide, please. This slide presents basically the essence of the termination rates report, whereby we have provided here the lowest regulated rates for fixed termination, and also for mobile termination rates. Some are computed at European level, and some are computed, so the full sample, and some are computed just taking into account the EU member states. And these are the values. And in brackets, we have provided the evolution which has been taken place compared to the prior data collection process. If we can go to the next slide, please. Right, and with looking forward, we have mentioned here, and it's important to keep in mind that at the 1st of July this year, the delegated regulation will be applicable. And for the EU countries, the delegated regulation prescribes the maximum FTRs and MTRs. And in certain cases, there are some adjustments to be made depending on where we stand. And also, it's important to mention that in the next year, BEREC will reflect on the future of the termination rate report and also discuss the annual reporting obligations of NRAs with respect to the application of Article 75 of the EEC, in particular paragraph 3. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention and pass the floor now to Annegret, our colleague from the Remedies Expert Working Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm co-chair of the Remedies Working Group and would like to present to you the second BEREC WG Parameters report, the report of 2021, and we can move to the next slide. You know that the Commission issued in 2019 the so-called WG notice, and there was one transitional year, so to speak, where the Commission allowed also the use of the previous method or combination. But now the one-year transitional period is over, and as of 1st July 2021, the Commission will assess the notifications of NRAs of the WG or pricing decisions by applying the principles of the WG notice, as well as taking the BEREC parameter values. So it was a great responsibility for BEREC now to update the values for 2021 with the cut-off date as of 1st April 2021. And as you know, the idea behind the WG notice is to have a consistent calculation of the WG, so a consistent methodological approach by NRAs, and in this regard then contributing to the development of the internal electronic communications market. And now the next bullet point is of key importance. The WG parameter report uses the same methodology as last year, because also the notice has not changed. This has a big advantage because any change in the values in the results can be attributed to factual developments. It's not due to any methodological changes. And of course, there is one big effect that we need to analyze, and that shows in the results, and I'll come back to this later on, and that is the Brexit, so the UK leaving the EU. The first implication of this is, of course, that the EU ERP, the equity risk premium, is now calculated only for the EU 27 member states. Whereas previously it was for the EU 28. So there is a difference here already. I would also like to point out one novelty that we have added this year's report upon request of ENCOM and of PFS from Norway and Iceland, and after clarification also from the Commission side. That we calculated an additional EU EEA ERP that can be used only by ENCOM and PFS for their WG calculations, not by the EU 27 NRAs. They will use they are assumed to use the EU ERP. So the report, like last year, contains then a parameter value for each of the parameters of the WG formula. We use the WG formula of the notice, as I said, with a CAP-M approach to determine the equity cost. We followed the Commission's notice as closely as possible. As I said, NRAs are now assumed to take into account these parameter values after the end of the transition period. The parameter values are the result of very complex calculations. It's a long process, and of course also based on data of Bloomberg and of the Morningstar or DMS data series, the long-term historic data series, and that was the basis for our calculations, and of course publicly available data, for example from the ECB or Eurostat for in particular the risk-free rate. I also will come back to this briefly. So we have worked like last year very carefully, cross-checked all the results and describing in detail the calculation steps so that all NRAs can replicate the results and can be confident that when they use these values that they are robust and are the result of state-of-the-art professional standards. We will publish the report so that the NRAs can refer to it today and in any case before the 1st of July. So now let's move to the next slide where I have the overview. We have a short introduction, then we calculate the RFR or the risk-free rate, and that is calculated for each of the 27 EU member states and also additionally for Norway and Iceland. We have the peer group. We have again a peer group of 14 companies. There was one change which I will show in a minute. Then we calculate, of course, the cost of debt. So that is the sum of the debt premium plus the national RFR that follows the WEC notice. And that is done, that is a company specific parameter, and that is done for each of the 14 companies. The same holds true for the equity beta, gearing, and asset beta. Again, company specific parameters calculated for each of the 14 companies of the BEREC peer group 2021. And then last but not least, we calculate the ERP, the EU-wide equity risk premium, assuming that the EU capital, that we are converging towards an EU capital market. And then in the last chapter, we summarize all the BEREC parameters as calculated by BEREC. There's an overview table. And we also have a very brief high-level comparison of the 2020 and the 2021 values exactly to highlight the changes that result from factual developments. And I would like to move on to the next slide to show this, to highlight this in more detail. So the first one is clearly now that we also decided to only consider the arithmetic mean as the EU ERP. This value is now 5.50%, which is slightly higher than the arithmetic mean of last year, which was 5.31. And we can say that this effect is due to the one-off effect of Brexit, because given the weight that the UK economy had, and the weight is there for GDP and of course also market capitalization is out now, is reduced, and therefore there's a different development with regard to the risk premium in the UK, and that largely, if not completely, explains the increase that we see on the EU ERP value from last year to this year. The corresponding value for the EU EEA is 5.48%, and that is, as you can see, nearly the same as the EU ERP. That is the value that can be used by the Norwegian colleagues and the Icelandic colleagues. The Brexit also had an impact for the BEREC peer group because BT did not fulfill any longer the eligibility criteria. They do not have overwhelming revenues in the EU, and their headquarters are also not located in the EU any longer. So they dropped out. On the other side, the Commission clarified that we could use the EU EEA area without, let's say, differentiating here like we did for the EU ERP. And as long as companies from this wider area fulfill the eligibility criteria, and that indeed is the case for Telenor. So Telenor replaces BT, all other peers remain the same as last year, and that is a change here from BT to Telenor. As I said, and I want to highlight this again, is that we use, following the notice, we use the CAP-M approach. And again, following the notice, this is based on long-term historic data series of returns over the time, the so-called DMS data, which we buy in the form of the Morningstar data set. And this catches, in our view, best the long-term trends of returns, rather than reflecting only short-term investor expectations. And of course, it smooths out the short-term volatilities that you always have. Given the fact that we are looking at the risk of investment in long-term infrastructure, we consider that this is the best approach to set forward-looking what is to be expected in terms of returns. The CAP-M, as you know, assumes a rational investor acting in an efficient capital market. And as I said, this is the EU-wide capital market. Therefore, we calculate the EU ERP based on this long-term historic data series. And we think that this is providing objective results based on the comprehensive historic data series that are cross-checked constantly by Dimson Marsh Stanton. We think that this is the best evidence-based approach that can be used, and we are convinced that it has advantages and is better than relying on survey data of investors' subjective expectations. So we wanted to highlight this, that this is done not only following what is in the notice, but that we also think that this is the best way to do it, to follow this model of the CAP-M here. So that's the explanation in this regard, and I want to come back to one additional difference in the results, and that of course also reflects a factual development, and you can see that the risk-free rates are decreased for nearly all EU member states. And this reflects that we continue to be in a low interest period, and that the governments can finance themselves at very low interest rates. And of course, this has the effect in the company, in the cost of debt, that this also reflects, that this also can be seen as reflecting for, or as being in a similar environment for the companies. So therefore, this explains a lot here in terms of the reduction of the RFRs for nearly all member states. So I wanted to highlight this as well. I think these are the most important results, and also comparisons of developments compared to last year's report. And now the report can be consulted and can be referred to by NRAs for their notifications as of 1st July 2021. So I would like to thank all experts again, and of course the BOR that approved the document. And with this, I would like now to hand over to Antonello and Erwin for the next documents. Please.
Thanks, Annabeth. This is only Erwin, but I will quite shortly present to you two interesting public consultations or call for inputs, which was initiated by BEREC on Monday this week. And I would like to start with the call for input on the general authorization system. You can see on the slide the aim and the scope of the opinion. BEREC is required to develop by the end of this year. So according to the EECC, and here I'm referring to Article 122, the third para of this article, there is a description of what BEREC should do. And in this framework, BEREC is requested to check and to assess how national implementation solutions of the relevant acquis are dealt with by member states. Secondly, what is the effectiveness of the current general authorization regime with the view of the single market goal? And BEREC is also requested, and we are happy to contribute to this, to identify potential areas for improvement and come up with some relevant proposals. Next slide, please. So what we are asking from you, but before, you might have a question whether this exercise is a timely exercise or not, because the implementation of the code is not completed in several member states. Yes, this is the situation, but the code is quite explicit on this. So BEREC needs to do this and needs to come up with its opinion by the end of this year. So the structure of the call for input, we would like to ask the interested stakeholders to answer some questions published by BEREC. So the first main topic is about the existing European General Authorization legislative framework, and here we would like to seek your experiences, your advices on the general authorization regime, which was used which has been used since 2002. And also, if stakeholders have experiences with the new system, we would also be eager to learn from your experiences. As a second topic, and the second, just please go back to the previous slide. So we also need to find and ask stakeholders to provide any information, any experience if they have on the notification template, which was published by BEREC and in the BEREC guidelines and used in several member states, and also the general authorization database, the European level general authorization database, which is available now at the BEREC website. And the last topic on this slide is that so if stakeholders have any further considerations on the entire general authorization system, and if they can identify any potential improvements, we would be very, very happy to hear this. And as it was presented at the beginning of the debriefing, we started a 6-week consultation period just at the beginning of this week. So with this, I finish my presentation on the general authorization call for input, and my second topic is about the draft BEREC report on the COVID-19 crisis, and where we try to identify some lessons learned regarding the communication networks and services, and how the communication networks and services could contribute for a resilient society. Based on our work program, you can see on the slides the aim and the scope of the report, and the aim and the scope of the report is converted into the structure of the report. So what we are doing in this report, in this draft report, is that we are presenting the different measures applied in different member states during the COVID-19 crisis in the electronic communications markets. And in this area, we are in a very good position, because you can recall that BEREC is presenting their own reports on the crisis situation. We started on a weekly basis, and now we are presenting it. We are publishing it on a quarterly basis. So we have quite a lot of information about what member states, what NRAs did in their own markets, in their own countries. And the second part of this, and the second chapter of the report, is about a very high level assessment of the COVID-19 crisis on the European telecommunication networks. And here we are especially focusing on the issues which are related to the open internet perspectives. So in the report, you can find an analysis about this topic. We were also requested to collect some case studies from NRAs, and you can find some very nice and factual case studies in the report. And the last part of the report is about the conclusions, when we try to draw some conclusions and identify some regulatory lessons, and also identify some further measures. You can see in the report, if you read it, that at this part we really need to improve a bit further of the report. But that's the reason why we are asking your input, asking the stakeholders' inputs, and based on that, BEREC will further elaborate on this chapter. And the last part is about the questions for the stakeholders. So please move on the next slide. Here you can see the questions we are imposing on the stakeholders, and you can see that those are mainly dealing with measures applied during the pandemic, how effective those measures were. What stakeholders believe what were the most important interventions and the most necessary interventions of the NRAs, whether there are any areas where NRAs should have intervened to help to fight against the crisis. Whether the stakeholders believe that we NRAs have the sufficient regulatory tools to deal with the pandemic, and we also had general questions whether what is your expectation? So what NRAs should do in a crisis like this? So what we are asking from the stakeholder is to answer these questions and also provide us any comments about the text itself, which are currently available at the BEREC website. So, and with this, I finish my presentation and hand it back, and I'm going to hand it back to Michel for the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Erwin. So for the time being, we have one question from Frederick de Backer, Telefonica. I will read this out if possible. Still a question on BEREC proposal on the setup of an advisory board. Does BEREC see useful parallel with the high-level group of digital regulators proposed by the draft EP IMCO report on the DMA? And for this, I will hand over the floor to Chiara. Chiara, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Michel, and thank you, Frederic, for this question, which is very interesting, and it's something that we indeed also noted in our paper. First of all, I would like to remind that this is a proposal that we made from the very beginning, from last year, when we responded on the public consultation on the DSA package, what was before the DSA package, and it's something that we always supported because we see many benefits in having board in technical advice, and we really welcomed the proposal of the IMCO rapporteur, which actually is a high-level group which looks very much like the advisory board that we are proposing, because it is consisting of representatives of competent authorities from different sectors, which is something which is acknowledged, and it's something that we also propose to have joint powers, let's say, approach, because we see that digital matters, they touch upon different sectors, and it would be actually impossible and restrictive to just get the view of one authority in particular, also because some authorities, many countries, regulatory authorities, they are also convergent. So we believe that it is very useful to have inputs from these different authorities which could be competent in digital matters. And something else that we also liked in these proposals is the structure which is based on expert working group. And of course, it is something that we have experienced in BEREC, and it's very useful because it gets the knowledge and concrete knowledge from experts from the national authorities, which is also a way to have a clear view of what is happening concretely in different member states, and not only to have maybe a bit detached view, let's say, from what is happening really in the markets. So it's something which is a bottom-up, let's say, approach, which is also enabling the EU action to be supported and to rely on resources which are existing and which are spread, let's say, in different countries where this regulation would be applying. So it's absolutely like a proposal that we support, and we acknowledge strong similarities to the proposals of the advisory board that we are supporting.
Thank you so much, Chiara. With that, we have no other questions. So I will wrap up this public debrief by thanking warmly all the co-chairs for their presentation and participation, also the members of BEREC office for the organization, and also in my team, Mike and Theodora, who also organized this public debrief. And I hope to see you soon. Dear stakeholders, you have a lot on your plate now. You have different documents to go through and questionnaires to answer. We hope to see you soon, and take care. Bye-bye.